Thanks to those who attended our breakfast sessions this morning, bright and early. Appreciate you making the time to get out of bed. And also welcome back to those that were here yesterday, and also a welcome to a few new faces we have today at the Canadian Circular Economy Summit. We had a really terrific day yesterday for day one. So, woo! Thank you. Some really thought-provoking conversations. We heard some inspiring stories from entrepreneurs and from some of the large corporates and others trying to shift our linear models. We heard a bit about community and place-based innovation models and how they're helping to drive our economic development opportunities across the country. We heard a bit about about key enablers of the circular economy, so innovation and collaboration and infrastructure and investment and supportive policy. We heard a little bit and talked a bit more about the importance of having good data and good standards in place as foundations to the circular economy, the importance of human-centric and nature-based design, about the challenges and the opportunities around repairability and around reuse, and about procurement as a key driver for the circular economy. So lots of content was shared. The questions I want to put back to you in the room as sort of the leaders of circular economy from right across the country is, can we push ourselves and challenge ourselves and our boundaries a little bit further today? And can we dig deeper on the true systems change and the considerations that we need to truly sort of make disruption, can you hear me? Disruption to our business as usual approaches. So, first off, some new people in the room, and just want to give you a chance to download our WOVA app. The WOVA app was one that we used quite a bit yesterday. If you haven't already downloaded, just take a moment to log on. The Wi-Fi is a free Wi-Fi at TRBOT-guest, and the invitation code is CE Summit 23, so you can search in the WOVA app the event, and if you log in with the email that you use to register, you'll have the opportunity to participate in and add the agenda throughout the day, see what the sessions are and the various topics and workshops. You'll be able to participate in the Q&A and maybe some of the polling that we'll be doing throughout the day, and an ability to connect with some of the other delegates here. So just maybe take a moment to do that. And what I wanted to do is just getting everybody kind of using WOVA again like we did yesterday, a bit of an exercise in the room. If you want to take out your phones just momentarily here, and in your WOVA app, navigate to our first session of the day, which we're calling Scaling Circular Economy Action, mind the typo, part one, and share what you liked the most about day one in terms of, if you go to the chat box at the bottom of the session, open up the chat box, and in a sentence or so, no more than that, just tell us quickly what you liked, and we'll have that on record and maybe be able to share back just a couple thoughts. So take a moment to do that. I'll see what comes in here on my side. So again, first session, chat box, networking, connecting with people, networking, great energy, okay. Getting some ideas that I can apply in my own practice. All right, inspiration, innovative solutions, catching up with everybody. I heard a few people say yesterday it was kind of like being at camp. People that haven't seen each other, maybe even ever in person, that have been working together for a couple of years, had the opportunity to see each other in 3D and have some time together. So really exciting to have you all back today. We talked about yesterday being kind of laying some of the foundation and groundwork. Today is about, as you see here, scaling circular economy action. And part of that is how we go deeper and further. And really what we want to come out with today is some inspiration and some insight from the group here about what are some of the key priorities we need to focus on in the next 12 months, the next couple of years, realizing this is a long-term game. What do we need to get right to get out of the gate properly? So part of what today is going to be about is developing an action plan that we, as some of the organizers, will take away your feedback. We've been taking notes in all of the sessions. We actually have some sticky notes on the corner outside of the room here with some of the action plan topics for your input on, where you can kind of feed in on what you think are some of the key priorities under what we've put together as sort of a top 10 list of some of the action items that we think we need to focus on here in Canada. So One of them is developing a shared roadmap and collaboration platform to advance circular future in Canada. The second one is around aligning and linking circular economy to our climate and biodiversity knowledge dissemination and our awareness building in this space, so making that stronger linkage. The third one is around a better understanding and integration of performance indicators and reporting tools and standards. The fourth one is around transitioning markets and businesses to more of a circular culture and supporting them with the sort of climate smart tools that they need to do that. The fourth is around inspiring resilient and sort of that place-based innovation we heard a lot about yesterday, and supporting some of those communities that are looking to do this on the ground. Six is around design programs and policies and regulations, as well as procurement to enable this transition and drive that. The seventh is around creating a low-carbon circular waste-to-value opportunities across sectors and supply chains, so not thinking about our traditional linear sectors, et cetera, but how do we work together and collaborate more in that way. The eighth is around mobilizing and deploying climate-smart circular funding and financing. The ninth is around centering Indigenous leadership and engagement in traditional knowledge. And the 10th is around strengthening and connections between circular economy, the social benefits, and the equity lens. So those are just some sort of a top 10 that we came up with in advance of this summit. But we really welcome your input. What are the gaps and what are the priorities under these 10 areas that we can be thinking about? So as I mentioned, throughout the day, we'll have invite you to sort of, when you're grabbing a coffee or want to grab a partner, a friend, or meet somebody, and have a look at the windows on the far side of the cafe lounge area over there, where we've got some sticky notes so you can reflect on those priorities. And look forward to kind of bringing this back at the end of the day, where we're going to do a bit of a voting exercise on what are the top priorities people would like to see moving forward. So without further ado, I'd love to bring up my colleague Joanne from the Circular Innovation Council, and she'll introduce us to our first round of panel. Thanks.
Cool. Is this on or no? Okay, we're doing handhelds. Good morning, everybody. Please continue to use the WOA app, because this is the day that we need to collectively pull all of those good ideas and your feedback for the summit today and the summits in the future. But we are very excited to, We're very excited to start the morning to focus on the opportunity to drive the transition and accelerate it, the transition to from a linear economy to a circular one, thinking about the enormous buying power of the public sector and how they can be a catalyst to really be moving things in a direction we need and at the pace that we need it to happen. So we're kicking off this morning with really number 6 in the list that Paul shared with you this morning, designing procurement, whether it be from the public sector or the private sector, as a key enabler to really support low carbon innovators in a Canadian context, but of course beyond. So to kick us off, I'm pleased to play a video that was provided to us specifically from the Honorable Mona Fortier, who was first elected as the Member of Parliament for Ottawa-Vanier in 2017. She has previously served as Minister of Middle Class Prosperity and Associate Minister of Finance. But today, most importantly, she serves as the President of Treasury Board of the Government of Canada, and of course is the lead for the Greening Government Office. So for those of you who were in the procurement session yesterday, you would have heard $200 billion a year spent on on goods and services at a federal level, representing about 15% of the country's GDP. And that's just the Government of Canada alone. If we pull in all the subnational governments, provinces across the country, as well as the municipal government, that number doubles. And so imagine if they were able to pool their know-how and to standardize procurement across the country, what they could do to unleash low carbon and circular innovation in the country of Canada. So without further ado, we'll hear from the Minister.
Merci, thank you. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And as President of the Treasury Board and Minister responsible for the Greening Government Strategy, it is a pleasure to be part of this summit. The work done by Circular Economy Leadership Canada, the Circular Innovation Council, and other circular economy leaders is helping accelerate Canada's transition to a low-carbon circular economy. And by bringing together leaders from across various sectors and industries like those here today, you're sending a clear message that it is a team effort, one that requires action from all parts of the Canadian economy. So congratulations on this sold-out summit. As much as I would have to like to be there with you in person, I sort of have these other responsibilities around the cabinet table that require my attendance that I'm sure you can appreciate. Toutefois, je crois en la vision que ce sommet défend et j'apprécie l'opportunité de vous laisser ce message de soutien et d'encouragement alors que nous sommes tous réunis pour créer un Canada plus vert, plus durable et plus prospère. Aujourd'hui, j'aimerais vous parler de certains des travaux que nous menons au niveau fédéral pour soutenir l'économie circulaire et de l'importance de la collaboration. Part of my mandate as president of the Treasury Board is leading the transition of our government's operations to be net zero, green, and resilient. And just to provide a bit of context, the Government of Canada owns 32,000 buildings, 20,000 engineering assets, and 40,000 fleet vehicles. And it purchases over $20 billion worth of products and services each year. Given this scale, the Government of Canada is in a prime position to demonstrate leadership and introduce greening policies for its own operations, and we have been doing just that. Our policy direction is laid out in the Greening Government Strategy, which I suspect many of you here are familiar with. The principles of circular economy are baked into our strategy through its focus on net zero carbon operations, life cycle costing, environmental performance of major suppliers, greener procurement, as well as ambitious waste diversion goals. Specifically, the Greening Government Strategy lays out a target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and we're on track for a 40% reduction by 2025 for our federal building and conventional fleet. The strategy aligns with the Government of Canada's national net zero by 2050 targets and works in tandem with several different government initiatives that aim to reduce our national emissions, such as through Environment and Climate Change Canada's 2030 Emissions Reduction Plan, agriculture's Sustainable Agricultural Strategy, as well as other vital efforts like advancing a bioeconomy strategy in Canada and implementing our government's critical minerals strategy. These are just several measures that our government is collaborating across government and in partnership with industry members to mitigate the impacts of climate change and to seize the enormous economic opportunity within our nation's grasp as we shift towards a more sustainable, green, and circular economy. Now, in order to take full advantage of the benefits that come with a greener economy, strong leadership is required. Through the Greening Government Strategy, we are demonstrating that leadership. And as part of the strategy, we have announced important requirements to help reduce carbon emissions and further strengthen green procurement in the Government of Canada. There's the standard on the disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions and the setting of reduction targets, which took effect on April 1st. This standard provides important incentives to major suppliers of the federal government to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions and set reduction targets for their organizations in line with the Paris Agreement. Importantly, it requires that all federal procurements over $25 million include an incentive or requirement for suppliers to measure and disclose their greenhouse gas emissions and set science-based reduction targets. Any federal government supplier will be able to fulfill this requirement through Canada's Net Zero Challenge or another internationally recognized equivalent standard. And there's also the standard on embodied carbon in construction, which applies to new construction and renovation projects over $10 million. Under this standard, businesses are required to disclose the embodied carbon footprint of all ready-mixed concrete supplied to the project and reduce it by 10% compared to the average regional baseline. This is an important step towards implementing a buy clean strategy in federal government procurement. Pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, le Conseil du Trésor joue un rôle important dans l'élaboration de politiques et de directives qui orientent les autres ministères et agences du gouvernement sur un large éventail de sujets, y compris les marchés publics écologiques. Et comme vous pouvez vous l'imaginer, il s'agit là d'une occasion importante d'assurer un leadership en temps voulu dans le cadre des activités du gouvernement. Now, more to the point, back in 2018, we amended the policy on green procurement, which supports the environmental objectives of the government, including the greening government strategy. Now, the objective of the policy is to advance the protection of the environment and support sustainable development by integrating environmental performance considerations into the procurement decision-making process. Furthermore, through the 2021 amendments to the policy on the planning and management of investments, best value has been redefined to ensure that through government procurement processes, social, environmental, and human rights factors are considered. This reflects the important reality that the lowest price is not always representative of best value. Et le gouvernement dispose aussi de 2 programmes qui cadrent très bien avec l'économie circulaire en permettant de transformer ou de vendre des biens gouvernementaux d'occasion. Tout d'abord, il y a le GC Surplus, qui gère les biens excédentaires du gouvernement tels que les véhicules, les électroménagers et divers matériaux. Et à titre de leader des services de disposition des biens excédentaires, GC Surplus a pour mandat de prolonger la durée de vie des biens excédentaires du gouvernement afin d'empêcher qu'ils se retrouvent dans les sites d'enfouissement. Ensuite, il y a le programme des ordinateurs pour les écoles, qui est un programme fantastique visant à prolonger la durée de vie de l'équipement électronique. Il offre également des stages de travail aux jeunes Canadiennes et Canadiens, les aidant ainsi à acquérir des compétences numériques qui les préparent au marché du travail.
So you can see.
Vous êtes tous ici aujourd'hui pour des raisons bien précises. Vous êtes ici pour faire preuve de leadership en matière d'économie circulaire, pour apprendre les uns des autres et pour collaborer afin de faire progresser l'économie circulaire au Canada. Vous êtes ici parce que vous savez que nous ne pouvons tout simplement pas nous permettre de continuer à faire comme si rien n'était. Et vous êtes ici parce que vous savez que la façon dont nous avons traditionnellement extrait, utilisé et éliminé les ressources met à rude épreuve nos systèmes naturels, nos communautés et notre santé publique. L'économie circulaire consiste à utiliser les ressources précieuses à bon escient. Il s'agit de considérer les déchets comme une ressource plutôt que comme un coût et de trouver des moyens d'améliorer l'environnement et l'économie en même temps. Within our organizations, businesses, and industries, we have a leadership role to play in ensuring that we take advantage of all the opportunities for the circular economy. The example I gave earlier of the green procurement standards we've put in place to leverage the power of public procurement to help us achieve these goals can also be adapted and applied to your own procurement activities. Every organization and business in Canada can take the necessary steps to ensure a green future and build greener buildings, maximize the use of low-carbon building materials, and ensure the use of clean electricity and fuels. And we can do all this right now. Nos activités d'approvisionnement peuvent soutenir nos objectifs d'écologisation de nombreuses manières. Et nous devons tous montrer l'exemple et nous assurer de jouer un rôle proactif en poussant les marchés vers des ressources et des produits plus écologiques. Je voudrais également évoquer l'importance de la collaboration et du travail d'équipe pour atteindre nos objectifs communs. Des événements tels que le sommet sur l'économie circulaire nous permettent justement de le faire. Nous nous rencontrons, échangeons des idées, discutons des leçons retenues et les mettons en pratique pour poursuivre notre travail et ainsi faire progresser l'économie circulaire. And at federal level, we have set up a mechanism for continuing the discussion throughout the year with other jurisdictions. Last year, I announced Buyers for Climate Action, a new coalition with the provinces of British Columbia and Quebec, and the cities of Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, aimed at advancing green procurement practices in key categories. Through Buyers for Climate Action, our respective governments are working together to share green procurement information, lessons learned, and leverage existing national and international networks to adopt best practices. With more than $45 billion in purchasing requirements every year, Buyers for Climate Action participants represent a significant part of Canada's market share in procurement categories with high environmental impact, such as construction materials, on-road vehicles, and information and communications technology. This supports Canada's transition to a green economy and sends a strong signal to the market of an increased demand for low carbon and climate resilient goods, services, and clean technology. We are also taking strong action internationally. We are partnering in leading a global effort to engage like-minded countries in greening their operations through the Greening Government Initiative. The joint Canada-US initiative now includes over 45 countries. Our common efforts will enable countries around the world to share lessons learned, promote innovation, and, where possible, collaborate on actions that will support their commitments under the Paris Agreement. We want to promote green industries and will certainly turn to the innovative practices that industries are putting in place to help us reach our sustainability goals in the government and for the country. In short, we are leading this transformation together domestically and internationally, and leveraging the buying power we have to promote change and innovation and grow a green economy that will bring new opportunities. Taking advantage of the summit and other such events, I invite you to expand your collaboration in key areas under your individual and corporate responsibilities. Your sectors and industries are doing some truly groundbreaking work. But all of this comes down to a very specific goal: improving the quality of life of Canadians, both now and in the future. It's a goal that is explicitly laid out in my mandate letter and the reason I got into politics in the first place. Our ability to thrive is linked to our health and safety, adequate housing, access to outdoors, access to clean water, education, leisure time, social connections, and so much more. And this is exactly what the Government of Canada's Quality of Life Framework sets out to achieve. In a nutshell, it's a vision and a public policy approach based on wide-ranging consultations for achieving better lives for Canadians. It goes beyond looking at GDP and is based on things that matter most to Canadians, including the environment. Just like the premise of the circular economy, it considers long-term dynamics through a sustainability and resilience lens to ensure that today's progress is not being achieved at the expense of future generations. The Quality of Life Framework is evergreen, and we are continuing the work with all levels of government, Indigenous partners, and your sectors and industries. The fact is that climate change is the greatest challenge of our time, period. But I'm optimistic. I am confident that through our efforts, we can meet our targets and lead the change needed through our nation to secure a safe, clean, and prosperous future for our generation and for the ones to come. And through events like these, we can build on our past successes, innovate, and accelerate our progress into the future. Alors, saisissez toutes les occasions qui se présentent aujourd'hui pour établir des liens, partager des expériences, apprendre et travailler ensemble. Because it's only together that we can truly advance our environmental targets and the circular economy. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
I've personally met the minister, so I bet you that wasn't a video. I bet you she tricked me and did that live and waited for me to introduce her or interrupt her twice. We're very excited to now have a panel discussion about this very opportunity of using public procurement to accelerate innovation, and who better with than Canada's largest clean tech think tank organization. I'm sure those in the room have heard of the Mars Discovery District, and we are thrilled to have its very own CEO with us today, and the Director of Climate Solutions, Tyler Hamilton, who is also going to partner with me to help navigate the discussion this morning. And the Minister has house duties, so in her stead, she has sent the Executive Director of the Greening Government Office, who will be with us virtually and live, hopefully, in the discussion as well. But without further ado, I need to try to take bits of Young's incredible bio just to explain and introduce the things that he is doing through Mars. As CEO, it's one of the world's largest innovation hubs and Canada's premier science and technology innovation ecosystem. The Mars-supported innovation community employs over 32,000 people in the health, clean tech, fintech, and platform technology sectors, representing over 40,000 of the startup innovation activities across Canada. They've contributed over $30 billion in GDP and are growing at a compound annual rate of 20% per year, more than 10 times faster than Canada's productivity rate. Young also serves as the chairman of the Toronto Board of Trade, and as well, he is a Governor and Council appointee to Canada's independent net zero advisory body. So who better than to help us use procurement?
Yeah? Oh, someone did it for me. Thank you, Joanne. I don't think this works, so I'm going to put that there. Well, thank you for having me this morning. And hello, everybody. Procurement. I can't believe we're all sitting here with bated breath, ready to talk about procurement. But it is a sign of the times, isn't it, Joanne? So yes, my name is Young Wu. I have the privilege of leading the Mars Discovery District. We're located right here in Toronto, actually. Two major locations. One is up at College and University, which is connected to the University of Toronto, the legislature, the subway system. It is really a hotbed destination for the talent that I think powers a lot of these kinds of topics. Another location we just opened up would be the Mars Waterfront Innovation Center, which is literally, I gotta get my bearings here. I think it's like right across on an angle. That way? Okay, thanks, Tyler. By the way, Tyler not only directs our climate programs, but he's also our grand poobah, I think. So we should recognize that. And thank you, Joanne, for actually, getting the stats on Mars out. So that'll save me, a couple of minutes of having to kind of explain all this stuff. But let me put it this way. As CEO of Mars, I literally get to see the future being invented around me every single day. And it's a huge privilege to lead this institution. Young entrepreneurs are bringing the solutions to some of the biggest opportunities, but also the most intractable challenges that face our communities and, of course, face our planet. It is clear that as the world emerges from this once-in-a-100-year pandemic, that the innovation economy I'm going to propose is the backbone for the future economy we're going into. We're not going back to the business as usual from, I think it's 3 years and 3 months of this pandemic. We're actually moving forward, and it's been accelerated as a result of many of the actions taken for us to get through this past 3 years and 3 months. So here's the thing. There is no pathway to net zero without the innovation economy. I'm going to say that again because it's at the heart of my belief system. There is no pathway to net zero without the innovation economy. And that's the lens I would look at the circular economy from too. Where are the biggest potential impacts from the circular economy in driving our net zero aspirations as a nation? Global carbon dioxide emissions fell by 6.4%, about 2.3 billion tons in 2020. That was during the lockdown of the pandemic, which, by the way, crushed the economic fabric of every nation around the world and cost us millions of lives. I'm just saying that that's not really a pathway for us to get to net zero. So reduction alone isn't going to do it. We actually need to add game-changing innovations to this total picture because we've got to start drawing down the carbon that we've already been pumping up there. And climate innovation has got to be job number one. Not job number 10, but job number one. And the good news is that many of the solutions already exist thanks to the drive and creativity of startup ventures that we get to see, that we're so privileged to see every single day over at Mars. But we have to invest into them now. We ran a challenge to find the top 10 pan-Canadian innovation champions, and some would call this a grand challenge, others might call this a moonshot, but we're Mars, so we call this a mission from Mars for climate action. The goal was to find the top 10 innovators in the energy space, in the real estate space, and in the transportation space that can materially reduce Canada's greenhouse gas emissions while also growing our footprint, Canada's footprint, in a multi-trillion-dollar global climate innovation economy. We actually measure the potential of these 10 ventures. It was part of this program. Tyler led this, by the way, our grand poobah. And it discovers that with a 1% market penetration for these 10 companies, you can take out 420 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions every single year. These are new markets. They're not dog-eat-dog competitive legacy markets. So a 1% adoption through procurement and through private sector adoption drives half of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions out per year. Material, right? At a 5% penetration, it takes out 3 times Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. So the theory is this: we can create asymmetrical advantage in a global multi-trillion-dollar climate economy while saving the planet. Now, who's going to object to that? I think it's a noble goal. According to RBC, Canada emits about 730 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and it makes us the world's 10th largest emitter. But whether it's our energy supply or our real estate and building stock or transportation systems, there are Canadian companies with proven and practical solutions. They need to scale up, though, because the choke point is not research. Research is terribly important, and we punch way above our weight in Canada with respect to research, translational research, intellectual property, talent. I'm just going to say this. If you think about what makes Canada up, do you think about oil and gas? Do you think about lumber? Maybe mining? Well, in addition to trees, rocks, and mud, I'm going to add intellectual property, translational research, and talent to that, because these are natural resources, and we have lots of it. Until we build knowledge-based economies around our gifts as a country, we are forever going to be shipping offshore the riches that we have in order to buy back products. To help our own future, we have to be able to control our own future. So I'm going to propose that this is a challenge that we can help solve for with procurement. That's why procurement should be so exciting to all of us today, because it is the key, not just in terms of the aspirations that the minister mentioned, but when you dig underneath that and start unpacking that, how do we make it happen? How do we connect silos within our ecosystem? How do we actually activate our coalitions to actually be able to drive the outcomes that we need from a procurement point of view? That's the question of the day. We all have that aspiration. How do we make it happen? So I'd like to talk about 3 examples from the circular economy. They are innovators that we see in Mars. There's 1,400 innovators, so if you like them, I'll maybe beg, borrow, and steal another, couple of days to talk about the other 1,397. But here's the first one. Everybody knows about CarbonCure in this room, I'm sure. You must, right? They're one example in the Mars portfolio, the most recent winner of the Global Carbon X Prize. And you might know, of course, because you are who you are in this particular room, that concrete is the 2nd most consumed substance on the Earth, next only to water. Concrete. It's also one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. So CarbonCure has turned this industry on its ear by taking carbon dioxide that's emitted from the concrete manufacturing process and injects it back into the concrete, making a better, stronger, and more durable product. So essentially, here's your playbook. Take an entire industry from a massive emitter of greenhouse gas emissions into a massive consumer. Not bad, especially in a multi-trillion-dollar real estate and global building sector. How about Toronto-based NR Store? If you followed the news recently, I believe Narwhal just published an article about NR Store, partnered with the 6 nations of the Grand River. It's developing what will become the world's largest energy storage facility. Why is that important? Because the wind does not always blow, the sun does not always shine, and this is the kind of facility that guarantees a steady supply of clean energy from renewable sources back onto our grid. So using simple math, there's about 14 million households in Canada. If you have one of these facilities, it pumps out 1 gigawatt hour of renewable energy, about 750,000 households. So my simple back of the envelope says, what's stopping us from procuring 20 of these things across Canada in order to power all 14 million households in Canada? I know, it doesn't quite translate from the back of the envelope, but there you go, there's a challenge for you. How about heat? Extract Energy is another company that actually Tyler was responsible for developing from its early concepts when it was a back of the envelope kind of solution. And Tyler and team worked closely with the CEO and founder. So we don't think about it much, but 70% of all the energy produced by humanity gets released into the atmosphere. Waste heat. 70%. A majority of that is released at temperatures that are too low to economically capture and use. And as a result, it's always vented. What if we were able to capture that? What if we were able to put that heat to work? That's exactly what Extract Energy does. They have built a new type of super efficient heat engine based on smart materials that can capture low-grade waste heat and generate inexpensive, emission-free electricity. Think about it. The world's coal, natural resources, gas, nuclear plants, they account for 11.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions annually. If just 15% of these plants used Extract Energy's heat engine to turn their low-grade waste heat into electricity, it would avoid about 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions every single year. Remember, Canada produces 730 million tons per year. So again, these are solutions from the circular economy that can materially impact whether or not we have a sustainable planet going forward. So the bottom line is, we do have practical solutions that are ready to go right now, but we need to coax investment capital off the sidelines. We need to convince governments at every level of every jurisdiction to make sure their procurement teams are seeking out and implementing made in Canada clean tech solutions. I think one of the biggest impacts that policy and decision makers can make is to prioritize procurement of made in Canada technologies. And we need to increase the odds that startups with innovative technology and sound business plans make it across to get past demonstration and pilot mode and into commercial scale-up mode. It's a choke point. And if you ask any particular entrepreneur, they will tell you this too. Because right now what you have is great ideas that are not making it into the main game. I've been an entrepreneur all my life. I came out of retirement to leave Mars about 6 years ago. And I think I remember trying to do business with government and quite honestly with big businesses at the same time. And you know what, you always want a quick yes, right? You want to say, okay, here's the best thing since sliced bread. Can you please give me an answer within the next, I don't know, month, year? Like a quick yes is great. The next thing that's better than a quick yes is a quick no. Because we work without safety nets even at the best of times. The worst thing we can get locked into is a long maybe, because it kills companies, it kills innovation. And this is what I mean when we say we gotta match the aspiration with the how, because we have to get to, if not a quick yes, at least a quick no, so that people can move on and find new partners. There's a huge difference between early adopters and laggards. And we have to turn government from a laggard into an early adopter. We need to turn our big banks from laggards into big adopters. So there are challenges for all of us to face, and I think this is one of them. Sense of urgency and a real sense that we can make a difference, but we have to act. Direct government support in the form of tax incentives, grants, loans, that's all crucial, particularly for big frontier bets. But they need to be placed across the economy. And here's the challenge. In addition to aspirations, how do you actually make it real? Nick is in the room somewhere. I think he's been doing a lot of thinking about this. But how do you activate governments in order to move quickly with a high sense of urgency? That can have by itself a gigantic impact in terms of how Canada leads, not follows. How we have a high sense of urgency, not a business as usual mentality. How we basically play to win, not just make the playoffs. And all those things, I think, are on the table. So there you have it. We have a pathway to net zero if we start procuring our own solutions from the innovation economy now. And without that, there is no pathway. I don't have enough time today to, as I said, threaten you with talking about the other 1,397 companies, but I think you get my point. Entrepreneurs can transform Canada's future, even as they transform the global climate. And by the way, to my private sector partners and friends in the room, there is nothing more profitable than purpose. Those are my remarks.
Have we got Nick? Beaming in, there he is.
Oh, there you go.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Very good to see you. And I hope you can see all of us. We're very grateful that you've taken the time. And we've just heard, I'm not sure if you've been able to listen to the comments from Young, but pretty motivating. And now we're ready to go. He's looking for a quick yes, just to let you know. So Tyler's going to pinch hit with me here and just have a really relaxed and informal dialogue about this opportunity. We only got about 15 minutes, but we're going to do our best to try to squeeze it all in. We're going to tag team questions here. Tyler's going to take on Nick, and I'm going to continue with Young. But you know, just coming off literally that conversation about a quick yes or quick no, and not a long maybe. I mean, often clean tech and circular innovators are looking to bring their innovations to market as quickly as they possibly can, as you've indicated, and outpaces often the long and complicated and bureaucratic processes of public procurement. So tell us a little bit how we can combat that.
I think I'm still mic'd.
You are.
Okay, perfect. I will say this, that this cannot be, you know, a one-off every single time we do this. The solutions, the material solutions that can really make the impact are known to us. And most recently, we actually did a deal with the city of Toronto, Mars and the city of Toronto, to represent some of those 10 pan-Canadian champions that can really take down greenhouse gas emissions, because Toronto, the largest city in Canada, the fastest growing city in North America, you know, we have key opportunities in the buildings sector, in the transportation sector, and in the energy sector, clearly. So if we've identified the top potential innovators that can impact that, why do we have to go through the same process when we go to Vancouver, when we go to Montreal, when we go to Calgary, when we go to every other city, when we go through federal procurement or provincial procurement? Is there not a way for us to harmonize this so that by going through one gauntlet, you know, Darwin's laws of natural selection work perfectly in these situations, right? If you pass one gauntlet, can that not be a way to accelerate your way through other procurement opportunities? Harmonization is key, because it's such a long road to get through the process.
Right.
That we don't want to do this multiple times if we can help it.
So the introduction of the Buyers for Climate Action sounds like it's an important initiative mobilizing different levels of government to try to rally around the same kind of criteria, adopting those criteria so that we can adopt quicker.
100%. And then if you match that with a marketplace, so that, you know, we're not forcing every single potential buyer to have to figure out from basic first principles, what are the available solutions? I mean, the current process for large organizations or governments are focused on risk management and cost reduction. And I'm going to propose that the kinds of things we actually need to solve for are not incremental solutions that have been around for 50 years. I'm going to propose that we need transformational solutions that won't have that same footprint. So how do we move from risk reduction and, you know, lowest cost into a portfolio of higher risk appetite? I'm a venture capitalist as well. I know that out of a portfolio, you are going to find 15%, if you're lucky, 20%, that will absolutely change everything. So how do you make sure that they're seen? Because they don't get visible through a traditional procurement process right now. And we need them. We need to see them. Buyers need to see them.
Excellent, thanks. Maybe I'll turn it over to Tyler, who's gonna pose one over to Nick.
Is microphone? Okay, it's on. You ready, Nick?
I'm ready.
Good to see you. Okay, so there's been a lot of work and momentum that the federal government's been on. The minister mentioned it. A couple of standards, one related to the disclosure of GHG emissions and the need to reduce those targets over time. The other is more focused on reducing the amount of embodied carbon in building materials, and it started with concrete. So I guess my question to you is, like, those are great initiatives. They're on the path to a Buy Canada or Buy Clean strategy. But what's next? Like, how do we expand that to more lines of products and also the different project sizes? Because I believe the minimum that was stipulated was 25 million. So, you know, across all government spending categories.
So good question, because that's the key question, is the scale up. How do we move faster, right? We can't do one thing at a time. So on construction materials, our next step is looking at steel. So we're working with the steel industry and others. And then we want to do a whole building, because of course then we'll look at a whole building or a whole piece of infrastructure, and we want to target 30% less emissions from the structural materials by 2025, starting in 2025. But how do we really do construction materials while we do fleet, while we do electricity, while we do buildings, while we do the 8 areas that Joanne's identified as circular economy, priority areas, textiles, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a challenge I think we all have. Like, how do we develop the criteria in each of those things? How do we talk to the biggest procurers in each of those things? I'm a big fan, there's a lot of discussion generally about circular economy, but I'm a big fan of saying, if we want to target this commodity, who buys the most of it in Canada? Let's get those 3 people in a room. And who's the greenest who buys the most of it? So let's get the 3 or 4 biggest, greenest buyers together, focus on that commodity class, focus on what are the requirements should be, work with them, work with the procurers. Often we develop things and then we go to the procurement folks. And the procurement folks have very specific requirements, as I've learned in the government of Canada. They have very specific questions they need answered, and they have very specific things. And unless you work through those things, it's not going to accelerate it. And so we need those procurers but it's not. This is, as you guys have mentioned, this is about speed now, right? Yeah. So I'm a big fan of taking the top 10%, the biggest, greenest buyers of whatever, developing the standards, developing, building, buying, and then the rest will follow, because they'll need to. I think sometimes we've gone too broad. I think at this point we need to target and just accelerate.
And I guess that group is the Buyers for Climate Action that you're working with to try to get that rolling. So
we've prioritized buildings, fleet, supplier disclosure, et cetera, right? And so for concrete projects, 10 million is the threshold, and that's going to go down to 5 million. For supplier disclosure, it's 25 million. But again, it's just to, like, let's develop something, let's get it through, let's go with a higher threshold, because something like 50% of the government of Canada spend is 25 million and up contracts. So, like, do you want to focus on 400,000 contracts, or do you want to focus on a couple of hundred that are half spent?
Yeah, makes
Right?
sense. Yeah. Okay, over to you.
So there you've got it. You've got eager beaver procurement functions across all ministries who are trying to find your ventures, and ventures who are trying to find those procurers. So sort of, obviously we've got both sides that are of the willing. Can you talk a little bit about the main barriers that you've seen, that Mars has seen from the supported, the ventures that they're actually supporting? What's the feedback you're getting?
Well, typically, innovations and innovators and entrepreneurs do not know how to navigate government. So it's not all on Nick and Nick's team. I just want to say that. I think Nick is doing some great things to try and help create the pathways. But our entrepreneurs don't know. And so, it's really important to actually be able to certify the solutions that are coming out. Because you don't want to throw stuff up against the wall and hope it basically sticks. You get one chance. And if you fail at that, you basically contaminate the entire pool. So I think it's important for both sides to not be living in their silos, to actually come with solutions that can scale. These things are not just about technology, they're about the teams that are building them, they're about the capitalization that supports them, and they are about the adoption capability that needs to come with these things. So I would propose that in addition to a marketplace, which shows you the universe of potential solutions, you must also be able to basically say, through an appropriate middle platform, these things actually can work at scale. Because other than that, you're basically forcing your buyers to do due diligence in a space where they don't see these kinds of solutions in the first place. So I think it's incumbent for us to actually add value to the process in the marketplace to make it happen.
And just by an extension of that, something that we've observed in our work around this area is that procurement folks don't get out. They are very process orientated. They don't have time. They're very under-resourced. They don't have time to go out and just explore the art of the possible, what technologies and ventures are out there that may be in development, could be further along and mature, ready for deployment, but they don't have any, the only time when they sort of reach out to the marketplace is when they're going to issue an RFI or an RFP or some kind of, and then they're confined by this very restrictive risk-based process. And so trying to find a mechanism like a marketplace where we can provide procurement professionals the opportunity to even just know what the market can provide at the time, I'm hearing is really important.
Can I build on that for a second,
Please.
Joanna? I think that's a great point, because on the flip side, from the startups and the scale-ups, is a RFP process managed by professionals that is sometimes focused on spelling out the features and spelling out the solution as opposed to really articulating the problem that they're trying to solve for, really articulating the outcomes they're trying to achieve. Because if I've often found on the boards I sit on, the questions are more important than the answers. And if you bleed over from questions into the answers, you prescribe what you expect. And yet the solutions we need are not the regular lowest cost, 20 different references, 30 years of deployment answers. Those aren't the solutions. How are we going to take out? I think the last numbers I saw on the carbon budget globally is that there's 300 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions left in the global budget before we tip over. If we're producing 50 billion tons per year as a planet, that gives us 6-7 years. Like, we've got to get on this speed. And so we can't look towards traditional solutions. We've actually looked towards transformative solutions. They don't show up on the roadmap. How do we construct a marketplace and an RFP and procurement process that allows those things to come through? That's what I mean by translating aspiration into actual capability and capacity to take advantage of it.
So getting away from specifics and requirements into outcomes. What is the outcome you're trying to drive?
Right.
Love it.
Maybe I can add something on that if I can. I think procurement folks it's a good point. They need, like, there's a lot of education that needs to happen, but it's the procurement folks, but also the clients for whom they work, right? So if you're going to build a hangar and it's going to be zero carbon and use circular economy principles, there's a defense person in charge of the hangar. There's the procurement person, and then there's a sustainability champion, for example, me, who might come in and say that should be zero, et cetera, use low carbon concrete, et cetera. The client doesn't know anything about sustainability. The procurer doesn't necessarily know anything. So it's even more complicated, where you have to educate those three and figure out how do you convince that project. The other thing on the outcomes is the procurement and the client need to figure out where's that balance. Like, you may say, I need to cross this river and I need to have, 100,000 people need to be able to cross the river an hour and 100,000 tons of merchandise. And I'm agnostic in terms of what way that happens, right? So that's an outcomes based, but we're definitely not there.
Yeah.
Right? As a society, we're not there, right? Because you could go even further, even higher on the outcomes and say, so, or do you say it's a bridge with 2 lanes using this kind of concrete, et cetera, right? So that's a lot of education on both sides, where the procurer needs to know what's available in the market. The marketplace needs to know who they need to talk to, who's making decisions on that procurement, so that we can embed the circular economy and sustainability.
So it sounds like that there's really a need for a marketplace that acts as a one-stop shop for all government buyers to learn about these solutions. And it just so happens that we're partnered with the Circular Innovation Council on just such a thing. Sorry for the shameless plug. Anyway, thanks for setting me up.
That's why you're the grand poobah.
Yeah. So you kind of answered gave an answer that addresses the question I was going to ask, which is there's barriers on the venture side, but what about on the procurer side? And maybe that's the main one that you pointed out. But are there any others? Is it obviously the education issue is a big one. But is it really is it inertia, culture issues, like just the slowness of changing the culture of procurement within government? Maybe you could speak to that.
I think if you pick the governments that are the greenest, then you don't have the political sort of direction problem, right? Like, so there's 6,000 municipal governments or whatever. You pick the ones that are going in this direction. So we have a greening government strategy. We want to be zero carbon. Every new building has to be zero carbon. Every retrofit has to use a $300 a ton shadow price of carbon. So okay, so the federal government's new buildings and retrofits are going to be green. So you can shop for the governments that are going to be the early adopters because they have that political direction. Then secondly, we definitely have to educate the clients of the buildings, because they're not, like, you got to think, federally, and it'll be the same elsewhere, but federally, the biggest buyers are National Defense, Correctional Service of Canada, RCMP. They have the most buildings and fleet, et cetera.
Which are not often the clients or departments that a lot of the ventures we work with think about, right? And you've pointed this out before, is that the low-hanging fruit that we think is there is not actually what we think it is.
And governments are, every department's responsible for their own procurement ultimately, and is the client for their own procurement. So really, a government is like many organizations, and you need to, if you have a clean electricity solution, then sell it not in Quebec, where it's already zero carbon electricity, sell it in Alberta or Saskatchewan or Nova Scotia, where the grid is not zero carbon, right? Yeah. So you also, like on the market side, there needs to be a bit of research to say, is my solution best for a prison, for a hangar, for an office building? So then who do I go to? But on the procurement side, we need to know what's out there in the market, right? Like, we got to ask for better. And I think that's where that education is necessary for sure. But it's across a large organization, that's thousands, tens of thousands of people. So again, picking the kind of key areas and picking the most politically driven, the ones that have that direction, I'd say.
Tyler, can I ask a quick question for Nick?
I do have to wrap up, but absolutely, one more.
I'm really curious about this because, the old adage of when you're going after something that's transformational, if it's successful, you get a bit of a yawn. And when it's unsuccessful, you get fired, kind of a thing from a buyer point of view. Do you see changes in terms of incentives and in terms of risk appetite from the buyers, the procurement and the clients, quite honestly, that can change that mindset at all?
I think it depends on what it is, right? Like a government buys everything from pens to jet fighters, right? So some things are super innovative, like a jet fighter is just developed, it's, et cetera. And pens won't be, right? So like, I think again, in procurement, it's always like, to me, it's got to be commodity driven. It's got to be the answer is always specific to the thing. I always say something like, employment insurance or CPP, you can't fail. Like people can't not receive their check.
Yeah.
So the risk aversion would be massive.
Yep.
But if it's something else, in some other area, then the risk aversion might be great. It might be very low, right? So I think it totally depends on what, like our defense research guys have something called a sandbox. Their intent is just to try a bunch of things in a restricted area. There's a ship called the HMCS Montreal. It's called the X ship. That's where they test stuff. So they won't test it on a Navy ship in operations and battle, but they'll test it on this one. So it kind of this is where it's hard to paint one picture, I guess.
Good clues there.
Well, you can see we can go on and on and on and fill a whole day with this subject, but you can certainly, I hope we impressed upon you the potential power of public procurement and procurement as a mechanism to accelerate our transition. We're very pleased and blessed to have all three of you with us today. Thank you very much, Nick, for beaming in from Ottawa or whatever lake you're at. Young, thanks so much. And to Tyler as well, to the team of Mars for helping me set this up. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
It has been a very dense session with a lot of learning, especially for a supply chain and procurement prof that has to somehow educate the new generation of leaders. We have about 35 minutes, so we're running a little bit short, and so we need to be creative about achieving some key tangible outcomes and takeaways for us and for the audience. My name is Gualandris. I'm Italian. I moved to Canada 6 years ago, and I'm a professor of operations and sustainability at the Ivey Business School. I'm also the director of our research center in sustainability, and I'm also the director of the Network for Business Sustainability, which is a network of about 200 research centers around the world. I'm just a little bit exhausted. I come from a week-long series of meetings and events with the United Nations, where we're trying to create sort of a new movement of business schools around the world that shape the leaders of the future, such that we can solve some of the problems that we see today. And I think building on that, the perspective we want to sort of leverage and emphasize today in this panel is, let's step back a second. We are zoomed in what's happening in Canada, in different provinces, in different sectors for different materials. But is there a general framework that we are going after? What is happening around the world? What can we learn about that? What are the set of principles that we should be thinking about as each one of us pursues circularity in different areas and parts of the world, of Canada, and of society? So with that being said, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. They bring a great wealth of experiences and perspectives from around the world. Ramona, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Sorry, yes. Good morning, everyone. Je suis ravie d'être là avec vous and to talk about this particular topic. My name is Ramona Liberoff. I lead the global platform for accelerating the circular economy, which is based within the World Resources Institute, which is a leading environmental not-for-profit. I'm not going to talk in detail about the work that we do at this session, but I will say that many of the issues, let me give some comfort that many of the issues and topics, such as how to scale mineral circularity, how to have fairer, better food systems, and how to integrate net zero and circularity measurement are all very much on our agenda. And I will sort of introduce with one thought, which is that right now we're living in the age of everything, everywhere, all at once. And I'm so pleased that we followed the last panel, because a lot of the common questions that every nation, every industry are struggling with is how to rethink just about everything not just our economies, but also our very relationship with the planet that we share. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking Paul and the team for the invitation. My name is Ignacio Gavilan. I represent the Consumer Goods Forum. This is an organization that basically brings together retailers and manufacturers from across the world, food and beverage, beauty and hygiene. So for retailers, think about your Walmarts, your Tesco's in the UK, Sainsbury's, Loblaw in Canada. And manufacturers will be the Unilevers, the Nestle's, the Kellogg's, McCain in Canada. Mm-hmm. So we have a good 400 of them. And in essence, what we do is collective action, positive change. So my day job is about convincing chief sustainability officers, even procurement people. That was a brilliant discussion, actually, and I can elaborate a bit more. But it's basically working with companies for circularity. The big pillars of the organization are around health and wellness, human rights, deforestation-free commodities, but of course, plastics. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Emmanuel Raufflet. So I'm the co-head of the Quebec Research Network on Circular Economy. And so as a research network, we're facilitating transition to a circular economy in Quebec through an interdisciplinary research project. And I'll be more focusing today on one of the initiatives we have about the Quebec research, the Quebec Circular Economy Roadmap.
So I'd like to start off with a couple of minutes of reflections, and I will allow the panelists to do the same. And then we will start with some questions. And if time allows, we will do some Q&A. In my remarks, I would like to start from a study that was published a couple of years ago now. It's called the Turning Point Report, which was chaired by Professor Tima Bansal, a colleague of mine that was supposed to be here moderating today. But we just came back from New York. She got COVID, and so I had to rescue the situation, so thank you for your empathy. So I would like to start from a key, I think, piece of data that I'm pretty sure you all know. The report calculated a sort of an aggregate circularity rate for Canada, and we are 6.1% circular. So this means that 94% of all the resources that enter our system at some point go wasted. That's a huge amount. And around the world, other countries are doing slightly better. So in Europe, for example, the Netherlands is about 30% circular. And so there is a lot that we can learn from others and perhaps adjust and replicate some of those lessons. When we look at around the world, many are discussing some of the levers that have been discussed here. So extended producer responsibility, demand stimuli such as public procurement, but also financial stimuli through venture capital and other forms of creating financing. We also talked about enablers, different business models, different approaches to circularity. And one important enabler that perhaps we haven't yet discussed that I would like to sort of emphasize is our belief systems, the principles that guide our decision-making in different areas of our life. And for example, when I think about Young Woo, that the CEO of Mars said, my belief system is there is no pathway to net zero without the innovation economy. Certainly that statement drives some of the decisions that he makes every day at the micro and the macro level. He also concluded by saying, there is nothing more profitable than purpose. What is purpose? What should it be the purpose of the transition? What metrics do we develop that capture that purpose and shape our actions? So I think reflecting on these belief systems and the metrics that sort of help to quantify and provide direction as we make different decisions in the procurement realm, in the technology realm, we need to think about what are some of the belief systems that are emerging around the world, what are some of the principles that characterize those belief systems, and how are they applied in different provinces, in different sectors, and for different materials, recognizing that there is a lot of effort that all of you in different parts of the world, in different sectors are already taking, and we need to, as said before, try to connect the dots between these efforts. Make sure that the effort in one province doesn't cannibalize the efforts in another, making sure that the efforts in one industry doesn't cannibalize the efforts in another industry, especially because circularity is about interconnectedness. Materials that used to be contained within one sector are now traveling across sectors. If you think about food discards, they can be turned into edible food products, but they can also be turned into cosmetics, they can be turned into construction materials, they can be turned into energy. And so you can see how certain policy in the energy sector might make certain investments in turning food discards into new upcycled products less convenient in other sectors. Yet those solutions could be very valuable in achieving net zero. So once again, how do we learn from each other's efforts, and what the set of principles we should put in place in order to catalyze the transition? With that being said, Ramona, would you like to?
Thanks, Yuri. That was a great setup. And as you started with systems change, let me give you 3 quick perspectives. On system change, we've pioneered an approach called system acupuncture. We heard in the last session that the very excellent idea of don't try and do everything all at the same time, start with where there is will. But also, if you take a systems approach, you need to start where there is potential for leverage. And in any given production system, such as food or energy, there are places where if the circular economy were to be applied at true scale and speed, it would have an outsized positive effect for people, climate, and nature. And therefore, we've identified these scientifically determined, maybe the reverse of tipping points, or sort of lifting points, where we're going to start and focus our energy. I think the second thing about that is you have to figure out where in the system that you focus. And procurement, I'm so happy that procurement is being focused on so much at this event, because PACE's heritage was at the World Economic Forum, where it was all about CEOs, grand commitments, Davos, literally the very top of Mount Olympus. The trouble is things didn't travel all that well when they got down to normal altitude. And I suspect my friend here has had similar experience. So we actually believe that we need to get the right knowledge to exactly the right targeted people. If the knowledge isn't targeted enough so that you can identify the exact name of a person holding a function who needs to do something and is empowered to take action, it's probably not granular enough. So I'm torturing many of the researchers I work with to get to that level of granularity and specificity. And then the final piece of this is that you actually need to go into those communities and hold them accountable to each other to take greater ambition. National level top-down targets can only go so far because they are constrained by the nation state. And more about that later, but I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think we've been looking at the Consumer Goods Forum. Let me give you a very pragmatic sort of view, right? We've been looking at pledges, we've been looking at commitments, things like that. I can make a living out of just producing commitments and signing them up, board approved, steering committee approved. So we need to take this down to something that is pragmatic, that is real. And when it comes to circular economy, we look particularly at plastic, right? So we developed in 2020 this set of principles around the golden design rules because it's objective. I don't need, as a sector, to influence anybody. Deforestation is about influencing traders. Human rights is about influencing your suppliers not to hire minors, that sort of thing. Packaging is entirely within the control of the companies we work with. So we came up with this set of golden design rules, 9 of them. There's a session later on with the Canadian Plastic Pact where I can elaborate a bit more. But this is objective, it's tangible, it's time-bound, it's voluntary, but there's peer pressure. And these are how basically to move PET, HDPE, flexibles from the current situation into a more circular one. Simple as that. In addition, we started working on principles for reuse and refill, which will require some behavior change around as well. So these are the sort of things I'm trying to land from a very 55,000 feet discussion into something I can throw to corporates and say, look, now you can do it. Of course, corporates will face this dilemma, right? I work a lot with chief sustainability officers, people with a heart in the right position. Then it goes to procurement. Don't get me started on finance. Go to marketing. Any changes in packaging? Oh my God, this packaging has been like this forever. This sells. What about moving it to transparent? Are you crazy? So it's a big revolution within the companies to get these things approved. So I need to identify the tools, the processes to basically arm the chief sustainability officer with good arguments. And I'll finish with this, but radical transparency on the supply chain has been critical in the past few years. The fact that things emerge in your supply chain where you have no control. As they say, it's only when the tide goes out that you learn who's been swimming naked. Transparency, super important. So I'll leave you with that.
What's wrong with swimming naked?
Okay, so I will not go there. I'll start. So one of the magic of circular economy as a way of framing contemporary issues and current issues and challenges is the fact that we can start from different perspectives and different points, like from procurement, from global value chain, and the way. So the way we've been at the Quebec Research Network, one of the way we are working with circular economy is on territories and on regions, because this is also and roadmaps also on a national or subnational or municipal levels do matter as well. So because this is also where they matter for several reasons. I think. First, I remember Paul's point earlier. The number one on the item is to reach a net zero, climate smart circular economy. I think we need to go further than that. I think if we go back, if we meet in 15 years from now, if we have reached that, we may have reached that, we may not. But if we don't have the right society, a fair and just society as well, we'll be and with high quality employment, fair relations, I think we will have missed the target. And I think so we have several mechanisms. So shifting from, and this is coming back to the previous speaker, sense of purpose. So I think this is something that we have to be very aware of that. And so we've been discussing about technical solutions, market values, market offers. We also have to talk about social innovation and about those processes that will support this kind of societal change that we need. And so I think those roadmaps also matter. Those roadmaps which with the high level of participation, high level of, we don't have the answers. Well, if you have the answers, share them with. We have partial answers, but we have probably, we need to be on a way to, maybe it's good, Ignacio, were mentioning 55,000 feet, maybe this is 100,000, but whatever. We have to ask ourselves the right questions as well, and sustain processes by which we ask ourselves and develop and explore the right questions. So this is my very abstract answer to very concrete problems, but.
Thank you.
And I'm not answering about the swimming naked question.
I'll get back to that point, perhaps towards the end if we have time. One question for you, Ramona. Given that your work sort of is focused in the Netherlands, but also globally, and so you have seen different principles and action items. So I'm trying to bring it down to more concrete examples. So what would be the top priorities, principles, action items that you have seen in the countries that you've worked in as it pertains to the circular economy for the specific sectors that you've been working on?
Of course, and just to clarify, circular economy are based in the Netherlands, do a lot of work in the Netherlands. We're actually global. I just happen to live in the Netherlands, or I'm there some of the time. I'm not quite sure when. So I'd point out two things I've thought have worked particularly well, one on the government side, one on the private sector side. So there's been a concerted effort for the country of Slovenia, a relatively new country. Who in the room knows about the circular economy in Slovenia, out of interest? Okay, only a couple, so I will encourage all of you to go out and learn more about it. Slovenia set out to create a governance framework for circular economy, and in their wisdom, because one of the things that governments occasionally fall victim to is short-termism or politics. I'm sure that doesn't happen here, but it does happen elsewhere. They basically took the governance system out of the political system. And that was probably one of the smartest things that could have been done in terms of consistency of execution and commitment. So it is now apolitical. Speaking of apolitical, there's the other thing I'd mention is there's a fantastic knowledge sharing resource in the format of something like the Apolitical Network. I don't know if anyone here is a member of Apolitical. Again, take a little poll. Okay, sign up for Apolitical immediately, the other kind of 98% of people in the room, because it is a network of the most progressive and thoughtful civil servants anywhere in the world, and they're just an incredible repository of good practices to share with each other. We need to do many, many, many more of these things in many more places, but I do take heart from those sorts of examples that help to accelerate good practice.
Thank you, Ramona. Building on that, Ignacio, would you like to share some of your experiences with the principles and the guiding sort of rules in the packaging industry, especially as it concerns consumer behavior and related phenomena?
Yeah, so I think when we put together this set of rules, and I can focus on plastic, but we also did for the procurement of soy and palm oil and some of the other commodities, human rights, as I mentioned, health and wellness, which is all about changing behaviors when it comes to consumers. But how do we motivate people to switch from one diet to another, right? A more circular, a more sustainable diet. Because we're dealing with humankind and greed, and those are very difficult things. So when it comes to packaging, which is slightly easier, it's obviously, you need to split the world in different regions, right? There's a number of regions, Global South, where what is my motivation to change the packaging if it's not going to be collected, sorted, and no chance it gets recycled, right? So we need an angle there to say, look, you need to start. You need to start working with governments. You need to have a discussion on EPR. EPR is not something that gets imposed to you. And that's our whole principle behind the paper we published, is let's take control of EPR. EPR is something we do with governments. Canada is a great example. If you look at Vancouver or British Columbia in general, it's a fantastic EPR system. But because there's collaboration, private sector and government, and that is the trigger for private sector to start making changes, right? Then obviously you go into the design, as I was mentioning before. It's very difficult for a company, if you've been producing your shampoo in a red bottle, or and I can give you an example because it's public, Sprite from Coca-Cola. That was a distinctive green bottle. Now they've taken the pigments out of that bottle and it's transparent. What that makes is recycled PET far better than before because it doesn't get polluted by those pigments. It's simple, it's very simple, but it takes a lot of power from within the brand to say, okay, let's switch our distinctive green bottle into a transparent one, right? So to start making those changes, we have to use a great deal of persuasion and business cases, and then you generate peer pressure, which is my secret tool, right?
Mine too.
It's perfect. You start generating the within categories, confectionery, dairy, you start generating that peer pressure, and then that has been working well. So take the principles, which are usually high level, into very pragmatic, specific, country-based solutions. Here in Canada, we've done a lot of work with the provinces on EPR. So it's taking it down to something palatable for companies.
I'm deviating from the plan to ask you a follow-up question before to move on. And peer pressure, and is often used for, peer pressure doesn't control where you go. It only sort of forces direction and movement. But what if you are creating peer pressure towards the wrong objectives? So I'm asking you, like in your work, how did you create peer pressure towards the right goals?
You need to set the right goals, point number one, and that requires a little bit of debate. As an industry platform, I can never settle for minimum common denominator, which that will be easy to get them. The peer pressure comes from the fact that there's a Race to Zero campaign on the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement. How are you going to get there? And then one or two companies accelerate and get to commit, and then the rest will That to me is a good commitment in the right direction, right? Refrigerant gases, hydrofluorocarbons versus natural. That's another good one. X company has installed, it proved to be successful. It makes business sense. Food waste, same thing. You go into the business case for investing $1, that's the WRI statistic, but $1 invested in food waste alleviation brings 14 to the company. That starts generating peer pressure. Why am I not the brand discovering that? But you're right, you need to set the target high, and then companies will start aligning themselves.
Can I hijack a little bit just to add on, which is sometimes, I mean, we forget that this is a social change process, not just for consumers, but for everybody. So actually, two elements of peer dynamics, are really important here. One is find the person with the highest ambition in the coalition, and then, as you say, Ignacio, lift everybody to that level, because then they don't have an excuse. There's someone kind of leading the way. But the other thing is peer accountability. Because if this is a community that is accountable to each other, they can say, well, we all promise to do this. And that gives the poor, beleaguered chief sustainability officer a bit of a get out of jail free, doesn't jeopardize his or her position, because somehow it's a commitment that stands outside of any one institution. So those are another couple of, from my social psychology roots, the ways that you get this to work.
And we need to stop rewarding people for stopping at a red light. And some companies just simply publish things, and it's like obvious, but they get a lot of credit, and we need to keep pushing. And civil society has a role to play
in advocating and stuff.
I think peer pressure do matter. I think positive deviance also does matter a lot. At the same time, I think there are some. So what we've done so far in the preparation of our roadmap is a kind of mapping of other roadmaps, and some roadmaps have been implementing or are being implemented through law. So there are some, in some context, law does matters, and those law does make a difference in and also or in the form of local agreements, in the form of deals between inside sectors or between sectors. And I believe very much in the power of education. What we do on a day-to-day basis, the kind of the way we teach to this generation and the way we teach to the next generation also does matter a lot. So I think there are so I think this I think there's no one single mechanism that will allow us to go. There is, because this is a very complex problem in which we are very interdependent, and there are several places in society, some mechanisms work better than others.
Yeah, I think the one thing we can't do is rely on knowledge to translate into action.
Yeah.
And if I look at the ratio of reports that say basically exactly the same thing, but get better and better at defining the problem, if I think about the amount of resource, I mean, we are 6 people in a budget of under $1 million a year, and we want to change the world. So closing that research to action gap, breaking down that knowledge that exists. Thank you. I'll pass a hat round later. But basically, it has to be extremely, extremely tangible. But I also think you need ambition and you need to dream. As people talk about pragmatism, when often what they mean is a lack of courage. And I really want to challenge that. Anybody who sits in a leadership position. Okay, that resonated.
Maybe another solution or another way is to propose solutions. And this is, I see that, for instance, in the arts and performing arts sector in Quebec. Some organizations have developed. The sector is mature. Most choreographers, most scenographers, stage directors were ready to move, but they didn't know how to. So some organizations have developed sets of solutions. Eco-designing stages, and so providing simple solutions. And this way, it makes things much more easier for people who are willing to engage and people who are brave enough, but who don't. Sometimes they don't have the resources, or they don't have earlier. So I think Joanne was mentioning the challenges of procurement officers, like providing solutions to enable.
So I'm learning here. So I'm learning, one, there has to be peer pressure. Peer-to-peer pressure is very important. So rewarding positive deviations and making sure the negative deviations are somehow signaled and perhaps disincentivized. The second one that I'm learning is that there is a lot happening around the world that we don't necessarily know about, and we should better look into those examples because there might be a lot of transferable knowledge and experience. And the third one is challenging a little bit the elephant in the room. What are the principles we go after? Are they applicable to different areas of business, from marketing to operations to supply chain to finance? Ultimately, those are disciplines that have different tools, but what if they would deploy those tools pursuing the same goals and objectives? For example, I heard before this concept of scalability. I'm an operations scholar, so I'm all for throughput and scalability, but sometimes not all solutions are scalable, and there is beauty in diversity. Nature is very diverse and worked in localized ecosystems that are balanced and regenerative. So perhaps if we go after only the scalable solution, we are missing out other solutions that could be adopted and replicated in different areas with extremely good results that work for community resilience. But because of that personalized solution for one community, you cannot scale the exact same solution for another community. And I learned that through my own research. I've been doing research both in Quebec and in Ontario on how the circular economy for food is evolving in the two provinces. And I've seen very different solutions and very different processes happening, with individuals being engaged much more at the sort of, I would say, building social capital in Quebec, probably because of the European history or the different culture that permeate the province, and a much more transactional approach in Ontario, where it was much more top-down and supported by smart city office initiatives. So two very different ways of achieving similar solutions, but what was interesting is that both of those were aiming for community resilience as ultimate goal, rather than scalability or profitability. So I don't know if you want to add to this point. I would like to give Emmanuel the opportunity.
Coming back to the, we started this panel asking ourselves, what are our assumptions and how to question our other assumptions and what are the elephants? Then today you mentioned what are the elephants in the room? And one of the elephants in the room is growth. I think one of the, and we know that we do need to decouple. We can't sustain it. We've known it we're kind of addicted to growth, to the way we define growth now. And I think this is something that we have to seriously think about and reconsider. And also we have to rethink and be very cautious about the way we evaluate and measure things and performance. And the current metrics, most of the time, they don't reflect what's going on and the destruction that is going on. So I think this is something that we have to seriously address. So that's kind of, I'm not saying how, but that's a position for research and for thinking.
We have 2 minutes, and therefore any sort of final remark from Ignacio or Ramona, would you like?
I think I just wanted to add, a lot of this is about accelerating. It's in our name, although I think I'm going to add elephant hunter to my business card now. But this is actually about leveraging what's there. The Netherlands is not filled with beneficent, amazingly intelligent people. I mean, of course it is. They let me stay there. But this heritage of resource consciousness on a tiny, tiny country where every inch matters, this negotiated outcome culture of poldering, every country has something that can be built on, and looking culturally at where the ground is, because frankly, we all know this is right in here. It's just that our definition of how it's right may differ. And for example, I love the idea of resource-rich, not just being trees, mud, and rock, but also intellectual property. That's a great example of leveraging something culturally.
I would say, just as for the future, stop foreseeing it, and let's start enabling it, which is something I keep telling my companies. And then that brings me to what it's my day job, is unlocking resistance to change. There's a tendency in companies not to change. There's a machine that is very powerful within. we're a CEO-led organization. We can look at the CEOs in the eye, but even with that, for the past 7, 8 years that I've been doing this, unlocking that resistance to change is the trick. So we need to find tools, processes, keys. I think all of us in here, it's what we're doing. So that'll be my reflection.
Thank you. Emmanuel, would you
So
like to close?
we need inspiration, we need imagination, we need tools. And I think also we can, if we go back to history, I mean, 2 generations ago, I mean, there was a tipping point in 1970 or 1971. You know,
Limits to growth?
Yeah, limits to growth. And, you know, this is when we started overusing resources. Right? So I think, and, you know, if you go back 2 generations ago, most of our grandparents, they were very circular. Without knowing it, and I think we have to go back to this kind of knowledge and wisdom as well that they used to have, that we have kind of lost. And this is on a very personal level. And if we look for inspiration, you know, they had different aspiration than the aspiration that we have as citizens of the world, consumers in 2023. But I think we have source of inspiration there, as well as among and in other parts of the world as well. So I think that's.
Thank you so much. So here, an action item that comes from what I heard, but also from theories of systems change that comes from the 60s, and again from Donatella Mido, I don't know if you know, in the 2000, where essentially we have heard about the importance of peer-to-peer pressure, mindset, but also justice, and the fact that some good mindset and principles already exist out there, perhaps are in the position of weakness. So what we could be doing as an action item altogether will be to constantly and consistently put in position of visibility, power, and give voice to alternative views of what world we should be building, what principle we should be using in those decision-making moments, such that those mindset can drive new ways of doing things bottom up in the system. Thank you for your time. I hope it was an engaging conversation. And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, the panelists, of course.
Well done, you.